Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is a cheap HP G1 Core i7 based machine I found on eBay for £130. It featured in my declassified used pre-built PC buying guide, which was a reference to Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, where I spoke about what to look out for if you plan on buying an old office machine with the intentions to upgrade it. In that video I purposely left out one flaw with this PC to see if any of you spotted it, and a lot of you did. These computers use a rather annoying proprietary PSU connector instead of a traditional 24-pin PSU to mainboard one. It's not a huge problem, adapters are available on places like Amazon for pocket change, but I decided to turn this into a no-fuss, easy upgrade gaming system with the help of just one component. This is the Lazy Gamer's Budget PC. If you don't remember, or if you're new here, let's quickly run through the specs this machine came with. It was a pretty good deal I think, as for our £130 we got a Core i7-4770, 8GB of 1600MHz DDR3 RAM, and a pretty decent looking cooler, which I think is actually stock in these machines, but don't quote me on that. The power supply outputs just 320 watts max, so at first I thought I'd be limited to a GT 1030 or 750 Ti, but instead I managed to find this, a completely silent and passively called GTX 1050 Ti. It's been out for a while, but I only noticed it when I saw a couple of sellers near me offering them cheap. One seller, who had theirs up for £120 on eBay, said I could have it for £110 if I could collect it, but then they never got back to me and my eBay offer expired. Never mind, because I took to the Facebook marketplace instead and found another for £125. I think that's a pretty decent deal considering this is still probably one of the cheapest 1050 Ti's I could find listed anywhere. What I love about this card, other than the silence, is that Palette recommend a 300 watt PSU, and in turn this thing needs no additional connectors. The cooler is quite tall though, bear that in mind, but what you get with this is a GPU that will work in most systems with OEM PSUs. Being a 1050 Ti, we should also see much better results than we would with a 1030 or 750. I also had to find a hard drive as this PC came without, so I picked up a 2-month-old 1TB HDD for a tenner. The one in here is currently mine because it's got all my Uplay and Steam games on it, which of course we'll be testing later. So, with just a couple of simple additions, this boring office machine is now ready to game. Oh, I almost forgot. I bought one of those super cheap Windows 10 keys as well. So, with our minor upgrades made, let's check out the performance. First of all, we have Assassin's Creed Odyssey, a game that seems to be more reliant on CPU power. Now usually when I play this with my Ryzen 5 1070 system, it certainly is the CPU that suffers more, though thankfully the extra cores certainly help out. Here with the i7 being a quad-core CPU, I was a little worried that the frame rates were going to be quite stuttery, but just like an i7-3770 I've tested in the past, the frame rates actually remained quite smooth. We were averaging around 40 frames per second on medium at 1080p, with this processor paired with the 1050 Ti in our Lazy Gamers system here. Now the performance I think was actually pretty good because there was no stutter to speak of. As you can see by those 1% and 0.1% lows here, there were no harsh dips in the frame times, so I have to say it was a pretty decent experience with this game. Now I sort of played it for about half an hour to an hour, roaming around a couple of different cities, out in the open fields, things like that, sort of all different scenarios, and overall it was fine. If you wanted to achieve closer to 60, low would be the best bet, but the 1050 Ti and i7 did fairly well with this very modern game. Now I've added another new title to the collection today in the form of Battlefield 5. Again, just like Assassin's Creed, if you wanted to aim for closer to 60, then low settings would be your best bet, though I have to say this average was taken from the first level here. When we moved on to the next introductory level, which I believe is a tank level in Libya, the frame rate sort of sat between 60 and 70 frames per second in that more open level, so just bear that in mind when playing Battlefield 5. Frame rates will differ completely depending on what map you're playing on, as well as multiplayer of course. I only got the game today, so I thought I'd fire up single player first of all, see how it ran, and I was pretty pleased with the results. I don't think it looks as good in some areas as Battlefield 1. I think Battlefield 1 looked better on the same respective settings, medium, and Battlefield 5 sort of has a bit of a shimmering texture issue to it. I don't know if that's just the way the game looks, but to me it doesn't look as pretty as its predecessor. But hey, it runs well, so I can't complain. Now, just like its predecessor, Just Cause 4 was a little more troublesome. I'd estimate that it probably runs quite similar to Just Cause 3 in the fact that we certainly saw some frame dips. As you can see, the 1% and 0.1% lows here were 21 and 16 respectively, meaning that we did see the occasional stutter in terms of MSI afterburner statistics, but I didn't really feel those stutters in actual gameplay, and it felt smooth enough, to be honest, when using this mid-range sort of CPU and GPU combo. Now, the i7 is a few years old now, and I still think it holds up pretty well. You can see that the GPU is the bottleneck here, but I think in a way that's good because it means that we could upgrade this card potentially in the future and not worry about having to upgrade the CPU just yet. And that's part of why I opted for a system like this. You still get fantastic performance at a fraction of the cost, especially if you're shopping around on the used market. Next up, it's one of the favourites, Witcher 3, a game that's always tested in tons of benchmark and review videos simply because of its popularity and ability to push even the newest and latest hardware to its limits. Here, medium settings, 57 frames per second was the average. We set a couple of options to high as well. Now, this average was taken over the course of a 1 hour gameplay period as we ventured out in the wilderness, came across a few little towns and settlements as well, and just generally proved to be quite a nuisance to the various residents of this open world. Now, the 0.1 and 1% lows here are 32 and 25, meaning that although we did see a few frame drops here and there, the gameplay overall was quite stable. If you wanted a solid 60 frames per second, VSync on for example, you could lower things, perhaps the post-processing settings too low, and achieve 60 that way, or of course just drop the main graphical settings, or perhaps even bump the resolution down. Okay, so I know it's old, but I couldn't resist firing up 2007's Crysis on this PC to see how well these components can handle it at the very high settings. I'm pleased to say that after bringing my Jeep to a tank fight here, the frame rates remained pretty solid. 55 FPS was the average, with the very high settings at 1080p of course. Now, I tested a couple of levels here, combined the average, and this was the overall result. So an old school game, yet one that's still pretty demanding like Crysis, will run just fine on this budget PC build. If we fast forward back to 2018 and jump into Far Cry 5, you'll see this combination handles the game pretty well. 1080p, a few settings on medium and a few settings on high, and we were able to maintain a pretty solid 50 FPS throughout here. There will be a few drops as the action heats up, but overall it was a pretty smooth experience on this budget system. The high definition textures, the most recent update of this game I believe, were switched off to allow for slightly more performance, though we did leave anti-aliasing on, set to TAA. Finally, we have the ever popular Fortnite, which has recently added planes into the game. I actually think this makes it a little more fun, but some die-hard Fortnite fans out there would likely disagree. Fortnite, a mixture of medium and high settings here, ran with 80 frames per second on average. There weren't really any dips to speak of, and a system like this would be ideal for running this title. You could certainly get away with lesser hardware if you just wanted to play Fortnite exclusively, but building a system like this would probably be a good idea just in case you wanted to push it a little bit more and play some other more demanding AAA titles. I think it's proved itself pretty well. It certainly is capable of that, and it really isn't a hard way to get into PC gaming. Just buy an old office machine, some of which you can find great deals on like this one, and stick a 1050 Ti in there, preferably the passive one like I've bought here, and you'll be good to go. Now, being completely honest here, and with a build like this, you're not going to be seeing 60 frames per second across every title you play, even if you do drop the settings quite a bit. I'm sure you may be able to build something that could for similar money if you really want to shop around for each individual component on the used market, but that will certainly be a build for another day, and in fact we've probably done something similar in the past. I quickly want to show you this Cinebench result here. It's quite interesting. If you take a look at the left in the pane of other results here, you'll see that it outperforms the 3770 and comes quite close to that Ryzen there too, so it still holds its own even in multi-core performance. And I actually edited this video on it, and it felt perfect. As for this one, I hope you've enjoyed this sort of lazy gamers upgrade guide. I hope you've enjoyed what we've put together here. It's been a while since we've done a whole PC, and it was certainly fun to make this video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. I hope it helps you out if you're looking at buying or building anything like this. If it did, leave a like on it down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And hopefully, I'll see you all in the next one.